In this video, there is a great testimonial on how attitude can change your whole world. Today, we are deciphering Chapter 7 in the Law of Assumption by Neville Goddard, and it's called Attitude. Experiments recently conducted by Merle Lawrence and Adalbert Ames in the Latter's Psychology Laboratory at Hanover prove that what you see when you look at something depends not so much on what is there as on the assumption you make when you look. Since what we believe to be the real physical world is actually only an assumptive world, it is not surprising that these experiments prove that what appears to be solid reality is actually the result of expectations or assumptions. Your assumptions determine not only what you see, but also what you do, for they govern all your conscious and subconscious movements towards the fulfillment of themselves. Actually, this is true. Take, for example, the double slit experiment, the most famous experiment in quantum physics. The light, when you observe it, it turns into a particle. When you are not watching it, it's just a wave. So what you expect the thing to be, it turns to be. Over a century ago, this truth was stated by Emerson as follows: as the world was plastic and fluid in the hands of God, so it is ever to so much of his attributes, as we bring it to it. To ignorance and sin, it is flint. They adapt themselves to it as they may, but in proportion as a man has anything in him divine. The firmament flaws before him and takes his signet and form. Your assumption is the hand of God, molding the firmament into the image of that which you assume. The assumption of the wish fulfilled is the high tide which lifts you easily off the bar of the senses, where you have so long lain stranded. It lifts the mind into the prophecy in the full right sense of the word. And if you have that controlled imagination and absorbed attention, which it is possible to attain, you may be sure that all your assumption implies will come to pass. This is true, and this is why we discussed the importance of thinking feelingly and actually holding your attention on one thing for long periods of time. Since in this day and age, we've been bombarded with a lot of cheap dopamine by short form content. So you should actually be able to focus on one thing for more than 10 seconds, because recently I've been experiencing a lot of that. I've been experiencing that I can't focus on one thing for so long. What that told me is I need to have a dopamine detox. What does that mean? It means that I should actually slow down a bit on the YouTube shorts and TikTok videos and Instagram reels, because they are so short and the attention span is declining every day because of that. So what do? I just limit the time exposure to these kind of content. I just watch long form content, maybe reading a book, maybe meditating for a little bit too long. This will actually improve the muscle of the mind, will improve your attention. When William Blake wrote, "What seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be," he was only repeating the eternal truth. There is nothing unclean of itself, but to him that esteemeth anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. Because there is nothing unclean of itself, or clean of itself, you should assume the best, and think only of that which is lovely, and of good report. It is not superior insight, but ignorance of the law of assumption. If you read into the greatness of men some littleness with which you may be familiar, or into some situation or circumstance an unfavorable conviction, your particular relationship to another influences your assumption with respect to that other, and makes you see in him that which you do see. If you can change your opinion of another, then what you now believe of him cannot be absolutely true, but is only relatively true. The following is an actual case history, illustrating how the law of assumption works. So this is one of the most powerful testimonials that I ever read. So be careful and let's dig into it. One day, a costume designer described to me her difficulties in working with a prominent theatrical producer. She was convinced that he unjustly criticized and rejected her best work, and that often he deliberately rude and unfair to her. Upon hearing her story, I explained that if she found the other rude and unfair, it was a sure sign that she herself was wanting and that it was not the producer, but herself. This is actually a tough thing to say to somebody, but it is true. That was in need of a new attitude. I told her that the power of this law of assumption and its practical application could be discovered only through experience. This is why when you guys actually ask me about something, I always tell you, try it yourself. You can't get validation from the outer world unless you change internally first. And that only by assuming that the situation was already what she wanted it to be, could she prove that she could bring about the change desired. Her employer was merely bearing witness, telling her by his behavior what her concept of him was. I suggested that it was quite probable that she was carrying on conversations with him in her mind, which were filled with criticism and recriminations. There was no doubt that she was mentally arguing with the producer, for others only echo that which we whisper to them in secret. This is so important, guys. If you are actually fighting with your parents, fighting with your partner, fighting with anyone close in your life, you actually doing it to yourself. How? Because internally, you are imagining fights and arguments, and you are winning this argument, and they are winning that argument. All you have to do is change that attitude, because they are just mere reflection of what's going on inside of you. I asked her if it was not true that she talked to him mentally, and if so, what those conversations were like. She confessed that every morning on her way to the theater, she told him just what she thought of him in a way she would never have dared address him in person. The intensity and force of her mental arguments with him automatically established his behavior towards her. Because remember, the universe is you pushed out. What's within you is going to be reflected back to you in the outer world. She began to realize that all of us carry on mental conversations, but unfortunately, on most occasions, these conversations are argumentative, that we have only to observe the passerby on the street to prove this assertion. That so many people are mentally engrossed in conversations, and few appear to be happy about it. But the very intensity of their feeling must lead them quickly to the unpleasant incidents they themselves have mentally created. So actually, most of the time, the people that are mean to you, you are creating them by actually forming mental conversations that are not good about them in your mind, and therefore must now encounter. When she realized what she had been doing, she agreed to change her attitude and to live this law faithfully by assuming that her job was highly satisfactory and her relationship with the producer was a very happy one. To do this, she agreed that before going to sleep at night, on her way to work, and at other intervals during the day, she would imagine that he had congratulated her on her fine designs, and that she, in return, had thanked him for his praise and kindness. This is a radical change of attitude, from arguments in your mental conversations to praising and thankfulness and all that. This is not an easy task, but imagination will make it so. To her great delight, she soon discovered to herself that her own attitude was the cause of all that befell her. The behavior of her employer miraculously changed. It reversed itself, his attitude echoing, as it has always done, that which she had assumed, now reflected her changed concept of him. What she did was by the power of her imagination, her persistent assumption, influenced his behavior and determined his attitude towards her. With the passport of desire on the wings of a controlled imagination, She traveled into the future of her own predetermined experience. You create your reality. Change your attitude. Change your concept of self and the concept of the people around you, and you will experience what you desire. Thus, we see it is not facts, but that which we create in our imagination, which shapes our lives. For most of the conflicts of the day are due to the want of a little imagination to cast the beam out of our own eye. It is the exact and literal minded who live in a fictitious world, as this designer, by her controlled imagination, started the subtle change in her employer's mind. So we can, by the control of our imagination and wisely directed feeling, solve our problems. This is true. So if you have a problem in your life, if your coworker is not good to you, he's mean to you or whatever, you can imagine him lovingly. You can imagine him saying to you the things that you want to hear, the good things you want to hear. You are actually now imagining him in arguments with you. Change that. Change it to something lovely and watch the magic happens. By the intensity of her imagination and feeling, the designer cast a kind of enchantment on her producer's mind and caused him to think that his generous praise originated with him. Often our most elaborate and original thoughts are determined by another. This is so important. You gotta be so alert to what is actually your thoughts. This is why sometimes I tell you guys, sometimes you are not wanting the thing because you want it, but because you saw someone that got the thing and you want to be just like him because of envy or whatever. But if you are actually soliciting your attention to one thought at a time, and you are meditating, and you are improving the muscle of the mind by improving your attention, you will know which is your thoughts, which thought is yours, and which one is not. The main takeaway from this chapter is your mental conversations can create reality much faster than you can ever imagine. If you are in an argument with somebody, and you're always like in fights and whatever, imagine that you are hearing them telling you what you want to hear, that you are living your best life with them. If you have a coworker that is mean to you, imagine that you are hearing them like joking with you and everything is fine, and watch the magic happens. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe to the channel, like to reach more people, comment down below what you want to see next, and I will see you soon.